Welcome to CopyCat Makes Episode 3, where I build the same chair you saw in Episode 1 along with 2 Ottomans to make a matching set. Well, we're watching the boring part at the start of every project, where we take big pieces of wood to make smaller pieces of wood. I wanted to talk about something that I've been thinking about for a while. I know a professional carpenter woodworker named Joe. Hi, Joe. And he said to me, I get paid to work in my workshop. And that is ultimately the difference between an amateur and a professional woodworker. He's in the workshop as his job to make money. I am in the workshop to learn and to build stuff in my free time. And I am doing the opposite of making money. I am spending money. A quick interjection here as I watch back this footage. I need to do better cleaning off the lens of my camera as I'm working. I record everything with a GoPro. I find it is the least intrusive way to document what I'm doing without having to set up a camera constantly. But the problem is sawdust does get on the lens, and then I record for an hour with dirt on the lens, which can be a bit distracting when watching it back. So I spend money to work in my workshop. I buy my own wood, I buy my own tools, and for now, not many people are buying anything from me. Generally, any hobby you pick up as an adult is going to require some investment. Woodworking is one I think that is particularly expensive, but it kind of has this carrot out there that maybe you can get good enough one day to start selling some things, to start making some money. I guess I'm kind of chasing that carrot insofar as I would like to monetize this YouTube channel and woodworking a little bit, just so I can break even and pay for the hobby. I enjoy doing it, and it's pretty expensive, and there's always the desire to get bigger, better tools. Right now I'm trying to abstain as much as possible because they are coming out of our pocket. There is a lot you can do with some basic tools. That being said, I do not have the minimum amount of tools to do woodworking with, and a beginner looking at this might say, you have a very nice, expensive shop. But I did buy most of what you're seeing on Facebook Marketplace, and I spent a lot of time searching for deals to try to limit my cost and also limit the capital that I have in woodworking. If I were to sell most of my equipment, I could sell for the purchase price or even more on some of these items. For example, you're watching me here cut out templates with the bandsaw. This is a 14-inch bandsaw that I was able to get for $100. It has upgraded guide rollers, and it came with a bunch of blades. It needed some repair and setup when I got it, but I didn't have to buy any parts, just my time. One of the best deals I've ever got. What you're seeing here, I'm trying to cut joint faces on the miter saw, and my joints are not flat. And I built the first chair using the miter saw joints and didn't really see this issue come up. But I decided after testing a few of these joints that I could not cut these joint faces flat. So when you put the two faces together, they were wobbling a bit. And I think that my blade might be bent. So here I am building a table saw sled to cut new joint faces using the table saw.
which this is the method used in the course for these chairs. But I thought I could get away with not building a sled. Of course, I'm using an old IKEA tabletop to make the sled. You're looking at the bottom of my old desktop that I replaced with walnut that I built last summer. And this is another thing of when you are spending money to work in your shop, you tend to try to be as cheap as possible building the projects, sometimes to the detriment of the project. What I didn't know when I started doing this is that the table saw blade was knocked at 90 degrees, and I think I cut a miter on it or something, and when I brought it back to the 90 degree position, it was no longer at 90. Did not notice until much later. And I don't think I have footage of redoing all of these, but basically I had to redo all the joints here with the blade fixed, and I just took, skimmed off a layer of each joint. So my pieces got a little bit smaller because of this, but it was a frustrating thing, and just one of those things. You're working, you can't tell anything is wrong here, everything looks fine, but once I tried to joint those faces with dowels, it became very obvious that it was not flat.
This is a saw stop table saw. It has an emergency brake if your finger hits the blade, and they're very expensive. I think the safety is worth it, but that is a $1,600 MSRP table saw. It's over double the price of brand new comparable machines that do not have the safety feature, but I was able to find it on Facebook for $860. Became a reasonable price, still more than a brand new DeWalt 10-inch table saw, but I think that the safety feature is worth it, and it was in really good condition when I bought it, like new. So here I'm making my dowel joints with my Jessam doweling jig. I have the master jig set. I think it was $250 a few years ago, and I thought the dowels were a practical low-cost joint. But what happened here is I noticed that from drops that my dowel joint had a bump on it, my doweling jig. So that was pushing against the material, making the material not flush with the jig. I also found that the screws holding the half-inch fitting in there, so this doweling jig allows me to switch dowel sizes. The little screws that held that together were loose, and so I had not properly tightened it when I switched from a 3/8 to a half-inch dowel, and that caused my fit up to be loose when the joints went together. So later on in the video, I actually recut some dowel joints because I did not think they were going to go well when clamping. I am starting to learn as I do this more that a lot of the challenge of woodworking is staying focused and paying attention to the details that matter on very repetitive, tedious tasks. I had to do so many of these dowel joints, and I think on that one that was loose, I didn't quite clamp it well enough, and the jig slipped, so my holes were a little bit too big because of the jig movement. So it's something that is quite challenging as you do something 50, 100, 200 times to remain completely focused on the important details. So now we are on the first clamping and glue up of the video. These are the chair sides that hold the chair frame, and then the chair legs attached to the chair sides. We are moving into the next phase of the project. We are taking small pieces of wood and making bigger pieces of wood. This is step 2 of woodworking. Watching this back, I wanted to comment about how much I really struggle with what to include in an edit. I had over 16 hours of footage from my GoPro. It was not all the work I did on the project, and I know some stuff was missing that I looked for. During this project, I had to buy extra batteries because on the weekends I only had about 90 minutes of battery, and I would work a lot longer than that in a day and not be able to record. But the question becomes, how much do you show of each step of the project? I really tried to speed things along here. I show some of the glue ups. I had hours of footage already of what you've watched so far, and we're 10 minutes into the video. So I am cutting a lot this time compared to CopyCat Makes number 1, but I still wonder if it's not enough, if I could trim it even more. I don't want to make videos that kind of gloss over everything without showing what it takes to do a project, but I also understand no one's going to watch me sand for an hour. So as you watch these glue ups here, I actually skipped several, and I am limited by the number of clamps I have on how many glue ups I can do at once. I only have the 3 parallel clamps. I have 5 or 6 F-style clamps that are longer, and I have some pipe clamps, the pipe clamps you see here, and I really don't have enough to do a bunch of these glue ups at once, and that's part of spending money. I don't really need to be efficient when I work. I can clamp up, wait an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, come back, do my next glue up. So while those first 2 pieces are now out of clamps, the second 2 are in clamps, and I start simultaneously working on the next step of the project here, which is routing the final shape from my templates using a pattern bit.
So here I'm using double-sided tape to attach the pattern to my piece. I bought these patterns from Four Eyes Furniture and the course from Four Eyes Furniture. Highly recommend it. It was pretty good. I was uncertain what level I was versus the course level, but I was pretty comfortable doing everything in the course. I did learn some good techniques and things that I can carry forward, and by buying the patterns, it kind of takes a big source of error out of the project. It makes it very accessible to get a good result, I think. The template bit here that I'm loading into my DeWalt trim router is designed so it has a bearing that rides along the surface of your template, and it cuts flush with it to make your wood sort of copy paste the shape of the template. So my workbench area is full of glue ups, and I turn my miter saw into a workbench. I realized after this first shot here that first person video was not going to work, and shortly thereafter I put the camera onto the workbench here so we get some third person action. So now the template is traced, and I have to use a flush trim bit, which will ride a bearing on the surface of the material and make the rest of the surface match the bearing surface. So here is the third person view where I start doing this, and the end result is a flush flat surface that is all exactly the same size in shape as the template piece. You'll notice at the seam of the two pieces here at the joint, you don't trim it flush to the template because the wood fibers at the joint are not as stable, and you're much more likely to get tear out from the router there. So you finish off the joint with a sander. So what do we think about third person versus first person footage YouTube? Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see more third person. I can't make any promises because to get good third person footage requires a lot of camera movement and camera work. And I don't really know if I'm ready to commit to that at this time. But I do think sometimes it just gets much better footage on what is actually happening in the process. Not always, but sometimes. Every time you clamp, the clamps are in the way, so you have to re-clamp to route the areas where the clamps were attached before. So here, as we get into a more repetitive part, I am now gluing up, and then I will be shaping these Ottoman leg pieces to the Ottoman leg templates. I wanted to talk more about why woodworking, why spend my money making things in my workshop. And what this came down to was a decision thinking about what I want to do as a hobby. Since COVID, and maybe even before, I've had a variety of hobbies where I kind of jump around, and I used to call myself a serial generalist. I know about and I'm good at a lot of things, but I'm an expert at nothing. In 2021, I got into custom mechanical keyboards, and I enjoy building custom mechanical keyboards, spending hours hand lubing keyboard switches, mostly stuff the average human would find insane. But I lost interest due to the fact that it was a bit cookie cutter. It was not challenging at all. You kind of had a kit you bought, and there was no actual creation from the person building the keyboard. It was more like following assembly instructions. In 2022, another hobby became making sourdough bread. I thought it would be a challenge to do, and I picked it up because my sister told me bread was impossible. And I made a lot of bread for about 2 years, and I haven't been making as much more recently, but I continue to keep a sourdough starter alive, and I just made bread in the last week actually, but it's become more every 1 or 2 months that I make bread, and I just kind of lost interest because I did not find it as challenging. Maybe I will make a CopyCat Makes bread video one day on my process for sourdough. The other thing I picked up, kind of sourdough adjacent, is making pizza at home, and I bought a backyard pizza oven and started learning techniques to make good pizza dough. And I got pretty good at that for a while, but again, lost interest a bit in the challenge, and also lost interest in the amount of calories in pizza. And so I don't make it as often anymore, and it tends to be an issue when I make it is that I don't have the skills polished for shaping the dough, launching the pizzas. So it is something that I do need to do more over the summer to keep at practice. So when I want pizza, I I can make it successfully. In May of 2024, my biggest wood project to date was building a large pizza cart. And if you want to see that, it is in my portfolio on my website, CopyCatMakes.com. Another item that I picked up since COVID was smoking meats. And I really enjoyed learning to and trying to get good recipes for different smoked meat items. I have made a very good pork butt, very good ribs from copying Mad Scientist Barbecue on YouTube, Jeremy Yoder, and pretty good sous vide brisket. Smoking meat is something similar to bread and pizza. It's something I want to know how to do, but I don't really want to be an expert at these items. I want to have them as a tool in my tool belt, and I can break out a pork butt when needed for a party, but I don't need to serial optimize these items any longer. I know I can get a good result I'm happy with. I'm not done yet with the hobbies I've picked up. The most unique one that I think the fewest people probably do is roasting coffee. And a couple years ago, I bought a coffee roaster at the encouragement of a coworker who roasted his own coffee. And I got into roasting my own coffee beans from green coffee. I would not say I'm an expert, but I get coffee that's somewhere between a local coffee roaster and the grocery store. I think it's pretty good. It's fresh, it's very drinkable, and I'm happy with it. I also have about 12 different ways to brew a cup of coffee, and I got a little bit into different brewing methods, but mostly I just make Americanos with my espresso machine. So my hobby list started to get kind of out of hand. Keyboards, coffee, bread, pizza, woodworking, cars. I am also a bit of a gearhead. And I decided that I needed to narrow down my hobbies and maybe become more specialized in one hobby. And that is why I chose to focus on woodworking. The thing about all these hobbies is that they all share a common thread of making stuff and sharing it with people. And at the end result, you have something you made. You made a loaf of bread. You made pizza that you can share. You made coffee you can make a drink with and share with friends and family. And I get a lot of enjoyment out of making stuff and the accomplishment and finished product of what you created. So that is how I came up with the name CopyCat Makes. CopyCat has been my internet name forever, and I actually Twitch streamed under CopyCat and had a logo, and decided that kind of the thread that connects all of my interests is making. And maybe this won't always be a woodworking channel, and it will evolve over the years as my interests and what I make changes. But I'm pretty confident that it's always going to be making something related, because that is what I enjoy doing. And in that same realm, I think making content and making videos of what I'm making is also making. So, sort of making inception, you might say. And I enjoy sharing what I'm doing, even if no one's watching. While we had the discussion on my many hobbies in making, I finished building the leg parts in the video, and I started making the panel parts, which are chair back, chair seat, and 2 Ottoman platforms. So I cut all my pieces to rough length, and then I am milling them to exact thickness here with the thickness planer, and and magically they're all done in 10 seconds. And then I have to set up the router table and edge profile all of the pieces that are going to be on the inner sides of the panels, because they cannot be routed once the assembly is done. So all these maple center pieces, I am putting a round over on the edge of them, and then they get cut to final length to make the chair assemblies. And some of these pieces are too short. At the final length, they are too short to run through the thickness planer, and so you need to make rough cut pieces that are longer
and then cut them up into smaller sizes. So here I am laying out all of the pieces for all of the panels and making sure that I have the correct quantities of everything. And now I start drilling the holes for the dowel joints that form these panels. And I decided in this video to show all the holes I make for one panel.
And now it's time for a montage of drilling.
Now I'm completed test fit of one panel and 3 more to go, exact same process, and I believe I only show the end. So this is the chair back panel that I'm doing now. That is the tall panel that goes on the back of the chair, and here is the chair bottom panel. And now here is the second Ottoman panel. All done with video magics.
So one of the last things I had to fabricate were these little stretchers for the bottom of the Ottomans. They have a curved top, so I used a piece of offcut here so I could easily bend it, and then I traced it with a pencil so I can then cut out the small curve with my bandsaw. And then I like it enough, so I copy that shape onto the second stretcher, and I used maple here instead of walnut because I had a piece of maple and I didn't have a scrap piece of walnut. I didn't have 2 of them that would work, and I figured it would look fine, and it does. After cutting on the bandsaw, I flush trimmed with the router bit again so the two pieces are exactly the same. And then I taped them together so I could run them on the spindle sander and smooth out the surfaces together to be exactly the same shape on both Ottomans. Here we are doing panel glue ups of the 4 panels that I built during this video, and each one I put the dowels in with glue first, then I hammer in all the dowels, and then I do glue up of each of the pieces afterwards to make sure my dowels are all seated properly. Once the glue and panel is assembled, it's time to put it in clamps and commence the glue up panic that happens every time. This particular glue up, I found that one of my pieces was not the same length as the other ones. I don't know why, and I commented about it here in the video. But I've got squeeze out everywhere, and I'm trying to clean it the best I can with a wet rag. And then I wasn't happy with some gaps I was seeing, so time for more clamps. I don't have enough parallel clamps of this size, so I had to grab some F clamps to put on the ends. Then I'm getting the panel out of clamps here, and I start doing a little bit of glue cleanup with a card scraper. Magic of video, you don't have to watch the other 3 panel glue ups. But here we are cutting the panels to final width. And the way this was done is the edges are a little bit offset, so when you cut them down you make the joint face there perfect. And I cut one side of both panels, then I scoot the fence in a little bit at a time until both panels are flush on the other side of the fence. The exact design dimension is not important. As long as these 2 panels are identical in width, the assembly will be fine. So here I'm using my track saw to cut a miter on the edge of the chair. This is where the back and the bottom meet. I got this track saw on Facebook Marketplace as well for about $350. And I bought this to make cabinets because I do not have a large enough table saw to cross-cut plywood. As you can see, I did not clamp this very well here, and it moved as I was cutting it. I think I had to recut the edge to get it to be flush with the other piece. these steps, as you get further along in a project, they get more and more nerve-wracking. Each of these panels, I've got hours of work in already, and so if I have a major failure that damages this beyond repair, I have a lot of sunk cost and time, and it makes sort of a mental lock-in for every step that you really get more focused on making sure you're not going to make a stupid mistake that will be catastrophic. So here is a thing I tried that did not work, and I tried gluing these together with just a taped miter fold joint, and I think it did not work because I made the mistake of leaving this dry in a very cold garage, and by the time I touched the piece, it was not cured at all yet, and it just broke apart. So while that was drying, or somewhere in the mix of the process, here I'm using my sled again to cut the ends of the Ottoman legs to the exact same size for each end. So I used the templates to set the angle of the first piece, and then I cut one end, and then I set the second stop so that all the pieces are identical here. It's kind of weird how satisfying it is as a woodworker to make four things that are the same. Alright, now it's time to do more dowel joints again. These are the joints between the panels and the side supports. In the chairs, there's a chair side. On the Ottomans, it's directly to the chair legs assemblies. And the trick here is figuring out how to align the dowel holes on each piece, because they are complex shapes. On the Ottomans, I think the reference was kind of easy, as I had a flat face to reference the doweling jig on, and I was able to just use the same one on each side of the panel, and then put the same holes onto the Ottoman leg.
The tricky part here on the Ottoman leg is that my straight reference face ran out as it goes into the curve of the leg. So what I had to do was put my holes closer together, so every time I moved my jig, I had 2 reference holes to secure the location. And so you can see here, I'm only making a hole, 2 spaces away instead of the full width. And then I move the edge guide of the doweling jig out of the way, and I can use 2 dowels. I use the pin and a dowel to reference the location. So I have 2 fixed points to fix where the doweling jig is, and I can drill a hole in the last point there and move again to the next 2 holes. I don't know where I learned this trick, but I have done quite a bit now with dowel joints and figuring out how to use the doweling jig in certain different situations. I am far from complete with this Ottoman, but this moment of seeing something that looks like the thing you're going to build for the first time is also a great moment in the project. So on this joint, putting the stretcher onto the lower legs, the Ottoman, the dowel joint is a little bit tricky because the reference faces are perpendicular. So in order to align this properly, you have to drill 1 hole in the leg and then adjust the reference face of the jig to put the second hole in that's further away. You'll see here, I drill 1 hole, then I adjust the hole position on the jig reference face there. And I get this right the first time, but then for some reason I brain farted and I knew I needed to have the jig at 5/8 and I put it at 7/8 or vice versa. And so I ended up with holes that were very visually obviously wrong when I looked at it, and I had to fill one of the holes with a dowel. Luckily, my error was underneath where the joint would be, so it's completely invisible in the final project. I didn't have to do a repair that you could see, and it was an easy fix.
Doesn't look right. What is wrong? That's 7/8. Why am I wrong? Because I don't know how to read 5/8 on a scale.
What I didn't know at this point was that 5/8 adjustment comes back to get me the next day in a very bad way. And here I am, it's the next day, clamp the drilling jig onto my piece and just drill away without a care in my mind. And then I drilled right through the side of the piece.
Holy smokes, what do I do now? Oh man. Didn't check the jig setting. Ugh.
So what I decided to do here is a little inlay repair. I thought it was the only thing possible. And this was clearly the biggest mistake of the project, but ultimately it probably took me about 45 minutes to an hour to do the repair in total. And I wanted to add in this little picture-in-picture look of the finished product here so you could see in the best light possible. It's still pretty difficult to see where it was repaired. And I could have put this on the bottom of the piece if I had even seen where the repair was while I was assembling it. But I forgot about it when I did final assembly. So now enjoy some hand tool woodworking, which I haven't done much of in this video. It's proof that I'm not completely incompetent or something.
Oh, that's fully wanting to go through. Great.
want to emphasize, only kind of know what I'm doing as I test fit my little inlay piece here. My hole that I cut out was way too big, and I had to cut another piece to fit in there more betterer. This little flush cut saw is pretty sweet. It has no kerf on the blade, so it's just a flat blade, and it doesn't mar your piece as long as you hold it flat on it. And you can flush trim this inlay I just put in directly to the piece, and it looks pretty good just when I get it cut off here. And then just a little bit of sanding and repair is complete. Now we return to regular scheduled programming of drilling holes in pieces of wood. So the question becomes, how much sanding do I show in a woodworking video? I show here maybe 30 seconds to a minute worth for several hours of sanding. Is that too much? Should I go even less? Maybe I should do Cam from Blacktail Studios and show a quarter second of sanding. What do you want to see? The hand sanding in between these panels was definitely the most tedious part of this project. Once the joinery is done, I can also edge profile the pieces. You you can't do this before you do the joints because these edges are used for reference to the dowel positions. And I really need to get better about my discipline with pieces and putting them in places where they won't get damaged, like that. I had a crack here, the large splinter of wood coming off one of the edges of my chair legs. So I was trying to stabilize it there with glue before I route the edge profile in hopes that it would not fly apart. And this did work. Now this may feel like some discontinuity in my editing, but I finally got back to gluing this together, and I'm cleaning the garage here because this is in mid-January and we are preparing for a snowstorm, in where my agreement with my wife is that she will have a parking spot during snowstorms. So my 2-car garage shop has to become a 1-car garage shop. So I didn't do a lot of work in the 1-car garage shop, but here you'll see these panels are not glued together, and that is because that glue joint failed epically. Left it in the garage without any heat on. It was super cold, and I picked the thing up and it just flopped right apart. So I decided I had to do better here, and I am making these little clamping jigs to put in between the slats in the panels so that I could firmly clamp that joint together with the biscuits. I made 6 of those with some scrap wood, and here I am doing the glue up. On the first chair, I tried doing my dowel joints for the joints coming up here, attaching the chair sides to the chair panels with the miter joint loose. And I found when I assembled the chair, the miter joint had a huge gap in it, if you watched any of that video. So I decided that I needed to glue this up before doing the joinery, and here I am. I'm carrying this into our laundry room because the garage was going to be so cold. I did not think the glue would dry. Another lesson learned from the first project was I did not take the time to tape up my glue joints here like I'm doing on the second project. And although I still have a lot of sanding to do, this is worth the cost in tape. And here I am checking the weather, and that is the massive snowstorm that's about to hit us, or hitting us actively while I'm doing this. And I had the snowblower there staged, waiting to decide when I was going to do the first pass. So what I did on the second chair is I put a dowel pin right at the intersection of the two panels. So that way I have a reference edge, or a reference hole going in either direction. By having only one dowel position on each mating piece that is measured, and all other dowel pins are referenced based on the jig, the hole positions are all exactly the same on the pieces, and they lined up great. So here I have all the holes done in the chair panel. I measure out the location of the hole exactly in the corner, and then I repeat the same pattern of holes on both pieces and test fit. The design of this chair has a reveal on this joint. So instead of setting it flush, you set the jig so that the holes are centered in the panels, and then move it a 1/4 inch so that you have a 1/4 inch reveal when the panel comes together here. All those joints were done with a 3/8 dowel, so I am switching out the insert in my jig to a 1/2 inch here, and I am going to make the joints between the chair legs and the chair sides with the 1/2 inch doweling jig here. These templates here that I made during the first chair project made this process extremely simple to repeat. All I had to do was tape the template to my piece, make my doweling jig line up with the hole positions on the template, and drill the holes to the correct depth. The important thing here is that I have 2 points of reference. The dowel jig has the face that's up against the edge of the piece, and then it has the pin that is in one of the holes. On the other pieces, when I am making the holes in the legs, I cannot reference the edge of the piece because it is not straight in the orientation the holes are in. So I have to use 2 different pins to get my 2 reference points to set the location of where the dowel holes need to be. It's hard to see in the video, but I am now coming back from basically a 3-week break of working on this project, I decided during this cold snap we had, it was too cold to try to warm the garage to a workable temperature. Just too much heating expense. So another thing that I pay to do woodworking is I pay to condition my shop. And after a couple of very large electric bills for December and January, I decided to sit out this cold snap, and I am returning to work here. These Ottomans were glued up and sitting inside the house for 3 weeks, and so I had taken the tape off in the meantime. And now I'm returning to work and doing some touch-up work before gluing up the chair sides. I seem to have not gotten footage of it, but I put a round over edge profile on the chair sides after finishing the joinery at some point. And now I'm doing some preliminary sanding on them before getting ready to glue up the chair sides to the chair panels. Just for anyone that doesn't know, the tape here is so that the squeeze out of glue when you clamp the pieces together does not accumulate in the corner of the assembly. It's very hard to sand corners of pieces, and so by taping, the glue goes onto the tape theoretically, and you do not have to do the same amount of work cleaning extra glue out of the corner of your piece. It's definitely worth the cost of tape, and I would say I will always do this going forward. The finger is the god tier of glue spreaders. So the seat assembly is complete. Now I can finish the joinery on the legs, finish the edge profile on the legs, and you can see here what I'm doing is I'm actually setting the position of the jig with the drill bit as my second reference point. I figured out I didn't have to go get another drill bit. I can just use the one in the drill, clamp the jig down, put the drill bit back in the drill, drill my holes, move on to the next set of holes. And here I am test fitting my first set of holes to the chair sides.
With the joinery done, I can then put the edge profile on the legs, the finishing touch of this assembly. And I do not like this router bit. It's a huge spinning 1-inch radius round over. I think it's 2.5 inches in diameter, and it was $130, but you can't really replace it easily with what it can do for you as far as the edge profile. I just try to be as safe as possible with my hand positioning here.
So I am cutting the bottom of the legs here, which are going to sit on the ground, and to make sure that they are all at the same plane when seated, I used my doweling joint jig that I made to cut a line with my marking knife on the bottom of the legs. And then voila, missing footage, the chair is glued together. So the assemblies are now complete, and all I have left are finishing steps. And here I'm using a chisel in the glue joint and trying to get out any little extra glue that went under my tape. I missed footage of this for some reason, but I had taped all these up and joined it together, removed the tape, and you're looking at me trying to clean out any little bit of extra glue that's down in these crevices with the chisel. And as in the first video, it's time to sit in the chair. Surprisingly comfortable for a chair that's designed to have a cushion that does not have a cushion. The finish I used for these chairs was Rubio Monocoat, and they say you should use the Rubio wood conditioner to clean the wood before applying finish, but it also says you can use acetone as a last resort, and I think acetone is pretty good at cleaning off any grease, so I can get a large can of acetone at the store for very cheap. There is something super satisfying about seeing walnut being finished and how it just goes from dull to saturated and beautiful right in front of your eyes. The panels in this project are actually made with Peruvian walnut. I use this because they were a lot more clear than the 4/4 American walnut at the store, and the price difference was like $1 a board foot. So I got a bunch of 4/4 Peruvian walnut for almost the same price as American walnut, but the wood does not have all the knots in it that American walnut generally does. And what I just did there was scuff up the first coat of finish with Scott Bright, and now I am applying a second coat, final coat of finish. This is the completion of the project. and I hope everyone enjoyed the video. If you want to see the finished project once I have cushions, I will share that on Instagram. We're getting a new rug and sort of redoing the whole area where they're sitting. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe.